A second round of direct ceasefire talks between Russia and Ukraine has ended in Istanbul. Ukraine says it's given Russian negotiators a list of children it wants returned as part of any agreement. Russia says the children were taken to protect them from the fighting. Kyiv also repeated its readiness for a 30-day ceasefire. Ukraine's defense minister says a new prisoner exchange deal has been agreed.
We agreed to exchange all for all, seriously wounded and seriously sick prisoners of war. Second category is young soldiers who are from 18 to 25 years old, all for all. Also, we agreed to return 6,000 to 6,000 bodies of fallen soldiers. Children. We have provided the other side with a list of several hundred Ukrainian children who were deported to Russia. We're calling for real work to end this war. The first necessary steps are clear to everyone: a ceasefire, humanitarian actions, and preparation for a leaders' meeting. If Russia is serious about ending the war, it will move forward on this. If not, international sanctions must follow.
The Ukrainian president says issues standing in the way of a ceasefire could be resolved in a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump. He made the comment at a European Security Summit in Lithuania.
Our delegation is now in Istanbul and we are ready to take the necessary steps for peace. Naturally, the starting point should be a ceasefire and humanitarian actions, the release of prisoners and the return of abducted children. And all key issues can be resolved at the level of leaders. And if Russia undermines even this initial agenda, and if the Istanbul meeting brings nothing, that clearly means strong new sanctions are urgently needed. Specifically, the strongest sanctions President Trump promised. Sanctions should hit Russian energy, especially oil and tankers, price caps, of course, and also Russian banks and the financial sector overall.
And Kremlin aide Vladimir Medinsky says Ukraine has agreed to consider Moscow's terms for a full ceasefire.
The final proposal presented by us, simply because the Ukrainians have been constantly speaking of ceasefire in a generic form. We have presented a specific proposal, starting with a 3-day ceasefire on certain areas. And this is what we have been working on with our military experts and professionals. Why is this step important? Including the halt of drone attacks. This will enable us to clear the way for the military leaders to meet.
Let's bring in our correspondent, Dmitry Medvedenko. He's joining us live from Istanbul. And so, Dmitry, like the first round of talks, they've agreed on perhaps the least difficult issue between them.
That's correct. So the exchange of prisoners seems to be the diplomatic channel that actually works between Russia and Ukraine. We've actually had exchanges of prisoners throughout this war, not in the numbers that have been happening as a result of these Istanbul talks. Now, as a result of the first round, we had the biggest exchange, which is around 1,000 people. Now, the two sides have agreed to this all-for-all exchange of sick, ill, wounded soldiers and young soldiers aged 18 to 25. The Russian delegation actually said that this all-for-all scheme translates to a number from 1,000 to 1,200 soldiers on each side. And that would mean, again, that this is the biggest prisoner exchange that has happened between the countries. When it comes to other issues discussed by Ukraine and Russia, it feels like talks there are much slower, and that communication only happens so far in Istanbul.
And Dmitry, where do we go from here? The Russian delegation said that they'll leave journalists to speculate about the next round of talks, though the Ukrainians are proposing another meeting by the end of June.
Yes, so we've heard from the Ukrainian delegation that they want to have a meeting from the 20th to the 30th of June, somewhere around those dates, so basically at the end of this month. The Russian delegation did not specify whether that was happening. Also, the Ukrainian president has been suggesting a meeting of leaders to meet Vladimir Putin. He wanted to do it last time, and he was in Ankara with President Erdogan saying, Putin, I am here, I'm waiting for you to arrive. Vladimir Putin didn't do that, obviously. And in this round, the same call was also voiced by Erdogan. He actually called these talks great as a result, even though they lasted just over 1 hour. And he said that the next logical step in these negotiations would be for Zelenskyy and Putin to meet, preferably in Istanbul. And he said again that if that happens, then he wouldn't be surprised if President Donald Trump would also join this meeting. But the Ukrainian delegation earlier said that Russia was not responsive regarding any suggestions to hold this kind of leaders' summit.
All right, that is Dmitry Medvedenko with the very latest live in Istanbul. Thank you, Dmitry.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.